This is a crocodile. This is its closest extinct relative. Here's another close relative, and if we keep going back in time, we'll reach, even before the mammoths, other bizarre crocodiles, and we'll arrive at this monster. 8 million years ago in the Amazon, there lived an animal as big as a bus. Its bite is estimated to be among the most powerful in animal history, capable of crushing bones, piercing shells, and tearing off huge chunks of flesh in a single attack, hidden in the rivers and swamps of the Amazon.
When it attacked, it was an explosion of force.
Giant turtles, mammals the size of rhinos, and other crocodilians could vanish in seconds between its jaws.
Where the Purosaurus lived, practically nothing stood above it in the food chain.
It was less an animal and more a living 8-ton trap. So how lethal was this animal? Why did it grow to this size? During the Miocene epoch, 8 million years ago, South America was full of giant caimans. Africa had enormous crocodiles, Asia had several specialized crocodilians, and over tens of millions of years, monsters like Sarcosuchus, Deinosuchus, Champusuchus, Shamosuchus, and several other colossal predators emerged. And it was precisely in the Amazon that the largest crocodilian that ever existed appeared, Purosaurus brasiliensis. The first question is, why did it get so big? To put the size of Purosaurus into perspective, it lived at the top of an Amazon filled with giants. At over 39 feet long, it was larger than Griposuchus, a giant gavial that could exceed 33 feet, and it also surpassed Murasuchus, another crocodilian that reached around 30 to 33 feet in length. Even in one of the most extreme ecosystems in Earth's history, where several giant reptiles coexisted, Purosaurus still stood as the largest predator of them all.
Because the Amazon of that era was an absurdly different place from today's.
The dense forest we know now did not exist. Much of the region was occupied by the Pebas system, an immense network of lakes, swamps, slow rivers, and flooded areas covering millions of square kilometers. It was practically a continent of freshwater. In an environment like that, an aquatic predator had unlimited room to grow.
Because the Amazon of that era was an absurdly different place from today's.
The region was inhabited by giant turtles, enormous fish, aquatic mammals, giant birds, and various other smaller crocodilians. Unlike large land predators, a crocodile in the water spends little energy sustaining a gigantic body, because buoyancy greatly reduces the weight it has to support. The more food available, the more advantage there was in being big.
And there's an important detail. The Purosaurus probably didn't have to compete.
Especially not with other large carnivorous mammals for the top of the food chain. In that aquatic ecosystem, it was the equivalent of a modern orca or great white shark. The most impressive thing about the Purosaurus is that it didn't live in an age dominated by giants. It lived in an age when many of the places that once produced monsters had already changed completely.
The dinosaurs had disappeared 50 million years earlier.
North America had once been home to giant crocodilians like Deinosuchus, but the great warm swamps that sustained these animals vanished along with the world of the dinosaurs. In Africa, regions that had long been covered by forests and extensive river systems began to face a gradual expansion of savannas and drier areas.
To understand the size of the Purosaurus, it's worth comparing it with some of the most famous predators that ever existed.
The megalodon was still slightly larger, but not by much. What's truly surprising is that Purosaurus was almost the same length as Tyrannosaurus rex, while surpassing every other giant crocodilian in history. Once you realize it was much closer in size to a T-Rex than to a modern crocodile, you understand that this animal existed on an entirely different scale. But perhaps the most shocking number is its bite force. Scientists estimate that Purosaurus could deliver around 69,000 newtons of force with its jaws. For comparison, a Tyrannosaurus rex is estimated at around 35,000 newtons, while today's Nile crocodile reaches roughly 16,000 newtons. Its bite was likely one of the most powerful ever produced by any animal.
And perhaps the most frightening figure is the weight.
Today, the jaguar is considered the great predator of the Amazon. The problem is that the jaguar weighing around 220 pounds. Purosaurus is estimated to have weighed nearly 18,000 pounds. That's roughly the weight of 80 adult jaguars.
Numbers can be hard to visualize, so let's compare it with everyday things.
A car, a pickup truck, and even a utility pole look small next to it. The Purosaurus was roughly the length of an entire city bus. Imagine parking a bus on a riverbank. Now imagine that bus opening its eyes.
A predator that size needed to eat.
Lions, tigers, and even polar bears fall behind when we look at the amount of food needed to sustain an animal weighing several tons. This also reveals something important. The Amazon of that time was extremely rich. Such a gigantic predator can only exist in an environment capable of producing an equally gigantic quantity of prey.
And here's a detail that makes everything even stranger.
If the Purosaurus were a mammal, like a lion or a bear, reaching this size would be much harder. Mammals spend enormous amounts of energy just maintaining their body temperature. Because it was a reptile, the Purosaurus could grow to absurd dimensions without paying that same energy cost.
And if you think everything I've shown you is already absurd, that's because you still haven't understood what it represented for the Amazon. Because the size isn't the most impressive part. What truly made the Purosaurus terrifying was the combination of three factors.
Size alone doesn't turn an animal into a super predator. What truly made the Purosaurus terrifying, the strength of its bite, the size of its teeth, and the speed with which it could attack. The pressure its jaws exerted was so absurd that few animals in history could have withstood a single bite. To put that force in perspective, imagine a rhinoceros. We're talking about an animal with thick skin, enormous muscles, and a bone structure built to withstand violent impacts. Even so, faced with a Purosaurus, that natural armor might not be enough. A single bite could pierce deep tissue, crush bones, and cause devastating wounds. The Purosaurus's teeth were equally impressive. Some exceeded 10 centimeters in visible length and worked like bone stakes. They weren't made to cut, but to pierce deeply and withstand gigantic forces without breaking. When the Purosaurus bit down, all that pressure was concentrated on the tips of those teeth. And they were enormous. The Purosaurus's teeth weren't just bigger than those of the great cats. They surpassed even those of the largest living crocodile today. Each tooth was roughly the length of a knife.
But perhaps the most frightening comparison isn't with a rhinoceros. The animals that actually live alongside the Purosaurus were other giant crocodilians.
Imagine a Griposuchus more than 10 meters long slowly crossing an Amazon river. In almost any other place, it would be the dominant predator. But not there. Hidden beneath the surface, the Purosaurus would wait for the right moment. And when it attacked, the difference would appear immediately. While the Griposuchus had long jaws adapted for catching fish, the Purosaurus carried a head built to crush. A single bite could decide the entire battle. After that, it would only need to drag the victim into deeper water and use its own weight as a weapon. It was lethal because it attacked with the burst of speed of a modern crocodile, carried teeth comparable to those of the largest carnivorous dinosaurs, and possessed a bite force estimated to be even greater than that of Tyrannosaurus rex. Today, when we think of the Amazon, we picture jaguars, caimans, and anacondas at the top of the food chain. 8 million years ago, the situation was completely different. The food chain was complex, and the Purosaurus stood at the top. The ecosystem was so rich and so productive that it sustained several giant animals at the same time. At the base of that food chain were aquatic plants, algae, and other microscopic organisms that turned the sun's energy into food. These organisms sustained an enormous population of fish, mollusks, and small aquatic animals. Above them came the large fish, which could reach impressive sizes. Many species spent their entire lives exploring the rivers and lakes of the Peba system, feeding on smaller organisms and serving as food for even larger predators. At the next level appeared the enormous turtles of the Miocene Amazon. Some had giant shells and represented an abundant food source. Alongside them lived aquatic birds, semi-aquatic mammals, and various other reptiles. Then came the first large predators. Among them were specialized crocodilians like the Griposuchus, which could exceed 10 meters in length. With its long, narrow snout, it was an extremely efficient fish hunter. In any modern river, it would be an absolute monster. But above it existed other giants. The Murasuchus, for example, could reach nearly 10 meters long and occupied a completely different niche. Other smaller caimans also exploited different food sources within that ecosystem. And then we reached the top, above the large fish, above the giant turtles, above the aquatic mammals, above the other crocodilians, the Purosaurus. While other animals had to worry about rivals or larger predators, the Purosaurus probably had very few natural enemies once it reached adulthood. Almost everything that shared the rivers with it could, at some point, become prey. An inevitable question is, how could an animal roughly 12 meters long and 8 tons hunt? After all, hiding a body the size of a bus seems impossible. But that's exactly where water changes everything. Look at the graph. The jaguar, one of the fastest predators in today's Amazon, takes about 0.6 seconds to reach its prey after starting the attack. Even weighing about 8 tons and measuring roughly 12 meters long, the Purosaurus's estimated attack time stays close to 1 second. And there's another important detail. When a jaguar or a lion misses an attack, they can try again. The Purosaurus didn't need several attempts. Its size meant the first impact was often the decisive part of the hunt. On dry land, an animal that size would be seen from far away. In the water, the situation was completely different. Like modern crocodiles, the Purosaurus probably spent most of its time almost fully submerged. Only its eyes and nostrils needed to stay above the surface. In an environment dominated by muddy rivers, shallow lakes, swamps, and flooded areas, its presence could go unnoticed until the very last instant. The Peba system offered perfect conditions for this kind of strategy. Unlike fast, transparent rivers, much of the Miocene Amazon was made up of slow, often murky waters. Many prey simply couldn't see what was hidden a few meters ahead, and that was all the Purosaurus needed. Even weighing several tons, crocodilians can accelerate surprisingly fast over short distances. Prey had only a fraction of a second to react. In many cases, they probably didn't even understand what was happening before the initial impact. And the impact was devastating. Then came the second stage of the hunt. Like today's crocodiles, it probably dragged the victim into deeper water. In the water, its size stopped being a disadvantage and turned into an enormous advantage. Buoyancy helped move its 8 tons efficiently, while the prey struggled to stay stable. That's why the Purosaurus wasn't a hunter based on speed, endurance, or pursuit. Its main weapon was surprise. It turned the landscape itself into a trap, and for millions of years, any animal that got too close to the water risked vanishing in seconds between its jaws. But perhaps the most interesting question is, if you encountered a Purosaurus, what would your chances of survival be? To answer that, we need to remember one thing. The Purosaurus was not a runner. Like modern crocodiles, its main weapon was ambush. The most dangerous place wouldn't be an open plain. It would be a riverbank. An average human runs between 10 and 15 kilometers per hour. A jaguar can exceed 80. A lion gets close to that. Even a hippo, which seems slow, can run more than 30 kilometers per hour over short distances. In a long chase on dry land, many of these animals would have the advantage. The problem is that the Purosaurus probably didn't hunt that way. If the attack happened just a few meters away, in the water or near the bank, top speed mattered much less than reaction time. And in that scenario, the chances of escape plummeted. For a human caught by surprise at the river's edge, the probability of survival would be extremely low. Before even understanding what was happening, the attack would already have begun. But what about modern crocodiles? The answer is probably simple. They would avoid the confrontation. An adult Nile crocodile measures about 5 meters. A very large saltwater crocodile can exceed 6 meters. Both are formidable predators. But faced with a Purosaurus of roughly 12 meters and 8 tons, they'd be closer to the size of prey than of a rival. In fact, many of the giant crocodilians that lived alongside the Purosaurus probably shared this same problem. While in any other ecosystem they'd be the masters of the river, in that environment there was something bigger. Much bigger. That's what makes the Purosaurus so impressive. It didn't dominate only fish, turtles, or mammals. It dominated an ecosystem full of other giant predators. And even among monsters, it occupied the top of the food chain. The Purosaurus survived for millions of years, dominating the rivers of the Amazon. But not even the largest predator of its time managed to survive the changing of the world around it. And to understand its extinction, we first need to abandon the image of the modern Amazon. Today, when we think of the Amazon, we imagine a dense forest, cut by great rivers and covered in extraordinary biodiversity. But the Amazon where the Purosaurus lived was very different. Instead of a network of rivers similar to today's, there was a gigantic mosaic of lakes, swamps, flooded areas, and interconnected channels covering millions of square kilometers of South America. In many places, water was the main feature of the landscape. The large bodies of water allowed giant animals to move with ease. The abundance of food sustained enormous populations of fish, turtles, aquatic birds, mammals, and other crocodilians. For millions of years, this environment worked like a true factory of giants. But the earth never stays still. While the Purosaurus dominated the rivers, a gigantic transformation was slowly taking place thousands of kilometers away. The Andes Mountains kept growing. The collision between tectonic plates that had begun millions of years earlier was still raising the mountains of western South America. The process was extremely slow. No animal could perceive these changes during its lifetime. But over hundreds of thousands and millions of years, the effects accumulated. As the Andes grew taller, they completely altered the continent's drainage. Rivers changed direction, new watercourses emerged, lakes were isolated, flooded areas disappeared. Others appeared in different places. The result was a gradual transformation of the Peba system. That gigantic aquatic world began to fragment. Instead of vast flooded regions connected to one another, the landscape came to be dominated by more organized river systems. Little by little, the foundation of what would become the modern Amazon River was emerging. For many animals, these changes represented new opportunities. For specialized giants, they represented a problem. The Purosaurus depended on a very specific environment. Its colossal size was an advantage only because there were enough resources to sustain it. An animal of roughly 8 tons cannot survive just anywhere. It needs space, it needs large bodies of water, it needs an enormous amount of food, and it needs to find all of this continuously. As the ancient swamps and lakes shrank, the amount of suitable habitat shrank too. But habitat wasn't the only problem. The prey was also changing. Many of the giants that shared the ecosystem with the Purosaurus disappeared or had their populations reduced. The very structure of the food chain began to change. More dynamic ecosystems with faster rivers favored smaller, more mobile, and more adaptable animals. And this created an enormous challenge. Imagine trying to sustain one of the largest crocodilians in history in an environment that is slowly losing the features that allowed it to exist. It's like building a skyscraper in a city that is disappearing. The problem doesn't arise all at once. It appears little by little. First, fewer suitable areas, then less food, then smaller populations, then less reproduction, and then, eventually, disappearance. This matters because many people imagine extinctions as sudden events, an asteroid, an eruption, a catastrophe. But the story of the Purosaurus was probably very different. Its extinction appears to have been the result of millions of years of gradual change. The world simply stopped favoring animals of that size. The ecosystems that produced giants began to disappear. The resources that sustained giants began to dwindle, and natural selection began to favor smaller organisms, more adaptable to the new conditions. In the end, the Purosaurus faced an enemy impossible to bite, crush, or scare off: environmental change. Its strength remained the same, its teeth remained the same, its bite remained among the most powerful in animal history. But none of those traits mattered when its very habitat began to disappear. And there's something fascinating about that. For most of this video, we talked about a 12-meter monster, a predator capable of crushing bones, dominating other giant crocodilians, and occupying the absolute top of the food chain. But the story of the Purosaurus doesn't end with an epic battle against another predator. It doesn't end with a fight for survival. It ends with something far more powerful: the transformation of an entire continent. Because in the end, the Purosaurus didn't disappear because it met a stronger animal. It disappeared because the Amazon that had created that giant simply ceased to exist. And when the world changes, even the greatest monsters in history can disappear along with it. But even after disappearing, the Purosaurus was not completely erased from history. For millions of years, its bones remained buried under sediments, accumulated by the ancient rivers and lakes of the Amazon. The forest changed, the climate changed, species emerged and disappeared, and the remains of that giant stayed hidden beneath the ground. Until, much later, humans began to find them. The story of the Purosaurus' discovery begins in the South American Amazon, especially in regions of Brazil, Peru, and Colombia, where Miocene geological outcrops preserved fossils of a world completely different from today's. The first remains were found back in the 19th century. At the time, researchers knew those bones belonged to a gigantic crocodilian, but they had no idea of the animal's true dimensions. After all, no one expected to find a caiman bigger than a bus. The name Purosaurus arose in reference to the Purus River, one of the great tributaries of the Amazon, the region where part of the fossils was found. As new expeditions advanced through the Amazon, more evidence began to appear: enormous jaws, giant vertebrae, impressive teeth, skull fragments far larger than any living crocodilian. But it was only with later discoveries that scientists grasped the animal's scale. Some of the most important fossils found belonged to the skull, and the skull of the Purosaurus was colossal. In some specimens, it exceeded 1.5 meters in length. Its head alone had dimensions comparable to the total size of many modern crocodiles. From these discoveries, researchers began to reconstruct the rest of the body using comparisons with present-day crocodilians. The more analyses were done, the more impressive the results became. The estimates came to indicate an animal about 12 meters long and roughly 8 tons in weight. And the surprises didn't stop there. The same fossil deposits that revealed the Purosaurus also brought to light an entire ecosystem of giants. Enormous turtles, giant fish, predatory birds, and other colossal crocodilians appeared alongside it. For the first time, scientists began to understand that the Miocene Amazon was one of the most extraordinary ecosystems ever discovered. Today, each new fossil helps fill in a part of this story. A tooth found in a ravine, a vertebra preserved in a layer of sediment, a fragment of jaw hidden beneath the forest. It's these scattered pieces that allow us to reconstruct the life of an animal extinct for millions of years. And perhaps that's the most impressive part of the whole story. No human ever saw a living Purosaurus. No civilization recorded its existence. No painting, no account, and no legend describes this animal.
Everything we know about it came from bones buried for millions of years. And yet, thanks to fossils, we've managed to reconstruct one of the largest and most powerful predators that ever lived on Earth.